The U.S. standard railroad gauge width between the two rails is 4 feet, 8.5 inches. Because that's the way they built them in England, and the U.S. railroads were built by English expatriates. Why did the English build them like that? Because the first rail lines were built by the same people who built the pre-railroad tramways, and that's the gauge they used. Why did they use that gauge then? Because the people who built the tramways used the same jigs and tools that they used for building wagons, which used that wheel spacing. Why did the wagons have that particular odd wheel spacing? Well, if they tried to use any other spacing, the wagon wheels would break on some of the old, long-distance roads in England, because that's the spacing of the wheel rits. So who built those old rutted roads? The first long-distance roads in Europe were built by Imperial Rome for their legions. The roads have been used ever since. Roman war chariots first formed the initial rits, which everyone else had to match for fear of destroying their wagon wheels. Since the chariots were made by Imperial Rome, they were all alike in the matter of wheel spacing. Roman war chariots were made just wide enough to accommodate the back ends of two war horses. Here's an interesting extension to the story about railroad gauges and horses behinds. The space shuttle is attached with two big solid rocket boosters to the sides of the main fuel tank. The SRBs are made by Viacol at their factory in Utah. The engineers who designed the SRBs might have preferred to make them a bit fatter, but the SRBs had to be shipped by train from the factory to the launch site. The railroad line connecting the factory to the launch site had to pass through a mountain tunnel. The tunnel was slightly wider than the railroad track, and the railroad track is about as wide as two horses' behinds. So, the major design feature of what is arguably the world's most advanced transportation system was determined over 2,000 years ago by the width of a horse's ass. It turned out that while this story is although wrong in many of its details, it isn't completely false in an overall sense. Regardless of the truthfulness of the story, what we should learn here is that a tradition, once established, influences many people for a long time. Therefore, when undertaking something new, you must take the first step carefully, as that step could become a tradition.